This is not just something that is hurting Virgin Australia. We know it's hurting the industry globally and is the worst aviation crisis we've ever seen in our history. We're not immune to that. Our board made a very courageous decision last night to put the company into voluntary administration and do so quickly with the intent of working with our administrator, Deloitte, to come through and be as strong as we possibly can on the other side of this crisis. I'd like to acknowledge the role of the board of Virgin Australia. In my 12 months here, they've been extremely supportive of the restructuring plan that I brought to Virgin Australia that was well underway at the onset of this crisis. I'd also like to acknowledge the shareholders of Virgin Australia. Over the past decade, they've invested something in the order of $6 billion to create an excellent airline, an airline that outperforms its competitor on customer service, on-time running and reliability, and significantly on culture, and that is something worth preserving. We always knew that there was work to do on the balance sheet, and that is something that we'll be addressing more aggressively through the actions of the voluntary administration. We take comfort from the comments from the government that this country needs a robust and healthy two-airline market. And because of this process we're going through, because of the early decision of our board, that airline will be Virgin Australia. We'll come back leaner, stronger and fitter and play our role in making sure that the economy of Australia, which is currently devastated by the impact of COVID-19, recovers as quickly as it possibly can for all Australians. We're very focused in working with Vaughan to make sure that we preserve as many jobs as we can to provide as many jobs for the existing Virgin Australia group workforce. They are the best in the business, and they're the best at what they do, and they deserve to have a very bright future, and that's my intention to make sure we create that. Importantly, Virgin Australia has for 20 years now brought strong competition to the skies of Australia. It has made airfares come down by in excess of 37% since our inception. We intend to keep doing that, and by being around in a healthy, lean and fit state on the other side of the voluntary administration means that we'll continue to do that for decades to come. So I'll pause now and hand over to Vaughan to talk on behalf of Deloitte.
Thanks very much, Paul. And I'd just like to recognise that this is an incredibly stressful and difficult time for the Virgin Australia team, and particularly Paul and his leadership team as we go through this. We are absolutely committed to making sure that we run a process which sees a restructured and financially strong and viable Virgin Australia come out of this, and that process results in the company coming out of administration as soon as possible. We're not planning any change to the operations of the business. Paul and his leadership team will continue to run and be in control of the business and work with us as we go through the restructuring process. We're continuing to engage with the advisors which were previously engaged by the company in running that process, which is commencing today. There has been an extraordinary amount of interest in the business and in the restructuring of Virgin Australia. So we are confident that this will result in a restructuring being achieved in a short period of time. As I said, we have not changed anything in respect to the operations. All the employees are continuing to be employed. There is no plans to make any redundancies. Wages will continue to be paid. And those who have been stood down and are accessing JobKeeper, the intention is to continue to make those payments available to those staff. We have been reached out to by a number of parties, including the government advisor, a number of the financial creditors, and also from Virgin Global from the brand perspective and IP. And we've got a huge amount of support from all those parties for the voluntary administration and with the intent of seeing successful restructuring come through for Virgin Australia.
Thank you. So I'll take some questions.
Roughly how many parties are interested in Virgin?
So there are a number of parties that had reached out prior to our appointment as part of a interim funding proposal or package, and there have been quite a few come in overnight. We won't go into specifics on who those parties are. Obviously, we have to keep those parties confidential, but there are in excess of 10 parties, and I'll say in excess of 10 parties who are known to us, who have got a keen interest in being part of the restructure of Virgin.
Paul, are you confident you'll still have your role on the other side of the restructure?
My focus right now is to make sure that the people who work within the Virgin Australia Group all have the prospects of a bright future going forward. I'm not focused on my own role. I'm working alongside Vaughan. I think the fact that we did not trade our way to this position, the fact that this has caught us by surprise as much as any airline in the world, where the oxygen supply of our business was cut off, revenue was cut off by this crisis, isn't a reflection on the wonderful management team and all of the people that work at the Virgin Australia Group. There was good acknowledgement that the plan that we had going into this crisis was a good plan to make sure we turned a great airline into a great business. And that progress was halted somewhat by this unprecedented event. So I'm confident that we can work with Vaughan and his team and the Deloitte team to make sure that we have a plan to take this airline into the future and be as robust and competitive as we possibly can be.
How long do you expect the administration process is going to take?
It's a really good question, and the intent here is not for it to be a prolonged, drawn-out process. There are a number of very sophisticated parties who have got the capability to be part of the restructure of the company. We plan to run that process very hard with our advisors, Hulan Loki, in order to make sure that that process is as short a period of time as possible. We are calling for expressions of interest, which we expect we will receive within the next couple of weeks. There will be a flyer going out today, an information memorandum going out next week, and then we'll define the process and the timetable at that point. But we expect to be in a position to know what the outcome will be, or likely to be, over the next 2 to 3 months.
I know you can't name the potential buyers, but can you just give us a flavour of what types of companies they are?
It's quite a wide cross-section of parties, and yes, there are international parties that have expressed an interest, but it is wide and crosses the whole spectrum of potential parties. We just can't go into give you any details at this stage. It is still very preliminary. I think as we go through the process, we'll be able to give a bit more clarity, especially if we move into a shortlisted group of parties. We should be able to give a bit more clarity around the calibre of parties at that time. But at this time, it is just expressions of interest, so we'll just leave it there.
If a private equity firm is the eventual owner of Virgin, and you said there's going to be no redundancies, but private equity's history is that there will be lots of redundancies.
Our intent is to position the business to be around a restructuring. I guess my primary objective is around creating the best outcome for all stakeholders, and employees are a very, very important part of that. The intent is to create optionality and seek to preserve as many of those jobs as possible. As we go through the expressions of interest as they come in, we'll be very mindful around the impact on all the stakeholder groups when we assess those options.
But you can't guarantee jobs long term, can you?
Well, we haven't got any of the proposals yet, but we'll work through that for all the parties, and it is about getting best outcome for everyone. So we will take lots of different things into consideration when we consider what the proposals that come into us are.
Paul, have you personally been talking to Richard Branson over the last couple of weeks about this? What's his response been?
So Richard Branson cares deeply about Virgin Australia. I talk to Richard on a regular basis. It must be remembered that Richard takes a lot of pride in this company, and it's one of the airlines he pays a lot of attention to. Richard's portfolio has hotels, cruise lines and airlines, so you can understand that Richard is hurting. But he's doing everything he possibly can to help us get through this, and maintains a strong interest in participating going forward.
And it's fair to say, it's also good to note he did put a personal note that has been made available to all the staff overnight.
Virgin's also a big sponsor of sport, particularly AFL V8 supercars. What's going to happen there with that arrangement?
We'll work through every one of those contracts as part of the administration. The AFL is a very, very important partner of ours, and it's important that we have those partners on the other side. I know that we have a lot of sponsorships as well in other sports, and we'll be looking at all of those as we go forward through the administration.
Also, in your latest last year on revenue of $3 billion. There were financing costs and expenses around financing of $1.2 billion. I mean, is that sustainable? I mean, given, I know coronavirus has made things a lot worse, but numbers like that, are they sustainable in the long term?
Well, certainly not sustainable in this environment. We know that.
It's understandably coronavirus predicament, but going into it, you were not very strong.
Yeah, so one of the things I've said from the very day I arrived here is that we wanted to turn a great airline into a great business. Part of that plan was to reduce the leverage and make sure that we lessened the debt burden on the organisation. That was going to be done through trading. There was an accounting change that happened through that period that took off-balance sheet leases and put them on balance sheet, and that changed the number by $2 billion. So there's more to this story. But to your point, there was some work to be done to get our balance sheet and our leverage into the sort of position that airlines need them to be in to handle black swan events.
Virgin Velocity, there's a lot of people obviously with points. Can you just talk us through what's going to happen there?
Well, Velocity is not subject to the voluntary administration. It is a separate legal entity. It is owned by the group, but it is not in voluntary administration, and that's really important. Those points for those members are preserved. They've not been lost. It is a very valuable part of the group, and it is the intent that forms part of the restructuring proposal as we go forward. There is no intent at this stage to sell that part of the group, and whilst there may be some of those ability to access those points, a pause for a period, it is around preserving value in that business. But that business is well structured, it has a trustee, a separate CEO, and we'll be working with them as we go through this process.
I think it's also important to say on Velocity that there is a trust in place that has cash backing for the points.
What about the travel credits you've been giving people during this period? Will they be valid still?
So we're operating a minimum domestic network as we speak, and those credits can be used on that network and can be used at any point in the future.
I've read some speculation you may have about $700 million cash at the bank. How long can you continue trading for before that money runs out?
I mean, we're going through the financial position of the business, and in particular the cash that is there. There is certain portions of that cash which is set aside to support merchant facilities and some of the financiers' debt. We're working through that. We're comfortable and confident that we have sufficient funding in order to continue to trade during this period to restructure the business. And there have been a whole host of parties who have already reached out to us with offers of providing financial support during the process as well.